Well, we're going to just launch right into our next panel. So we'll welcome to the stage Wahleah Johns. And we have, unfortunately, two of our panelists are ill and had to join us remotely, so we have them on Zoom today. But I'm so excited about this panel. So welcome, everyone. It's so fantastic to be with such an esteemed group of women. My name is Janelle Knox-Hayes. I'm a professor here at MIT in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and I work on various topics of environmental and energy justice. And the topic of this panel is empowering energy justice, building a global energy system based on equity and addressing past harms. Our panelists have such a wealth of expertise across the spectrum of energy justice. They're going to speak about the frontier domestically. They're going to speak about what's happening internationally. And we're really going to unpack this question of what does environmental justice mean. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce everyone. So we have Wahleah Johns, who's the Director of Indian Energy Policy and Programs at the U.S. Department of Energy. Welcome, Wahleah. We have Rhonda Jordan Antoine, who's the Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank. And we have Kathleen Araújo, who's the Professor of Sustainable Energy Systems, Innovation, and Policy, as well as the Director of Energy Policy Institute at Boise State University, who will be also speaking virtually. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. Our format, we're going to allow each of the presenters to speak for 10 minutes on the topic of empowering energy justice. I have a few questions prepared for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience for any questions that you might have. So Wahleah, please, we'll start with you.
Great. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. And it's my first time here, so really beautiful weather. And I've been in DC the past few, I guess, the week, and it's been really cloudy there. So it's nice to see the sun. I'm from northeastern Arizona, the Navajo Nation, and currently was appointed by the Biden administration to lead the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs at DOE. It's been an honor, but it's also just been a really tough job to, what our office does is we work with 574 federally recognized tribes, and it's been a learning curve for me, one, for government, being new to government, and then two, just understanding how diverse Indian country is. We call it Indian country in federal government. But just the diversity of tribes. Each tribe has their own status of how they were established, whether it's through treaties with the federal government or executive orders. And these are through our statute, we have to understand just that diversity, and that each tribe has their own language, they have their own perspective and wisdom and knowledge that they carry. And I think that's been really, for me, just honor to learn so much as I'm in this role. We recently came out with a report on energy access and reliability, I would say 3 or 4 weeks ago, a congressional report that really looks at, we did 2 listening sessions with tribes because we know that there's over 20,000 homes in Indian country that don't have access to electricity. They've never had the luxury that we all have right now with these lights and power. And I'm previous to this role, that's what I was working on. I was working to try to address energy access in the United States. I also come from a coal mining community. I grew up and lived near a coal mine, and that had been in operation for 50 years that used our precious pristine groundwater to transport coal 300 miles away to power Mojave Generating Station in Laughlin, Nevada, that powered cities like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, California. And meanwhile, over in where I'm from, in my community, we don't have access to electricity, grid lines. Our roads are unpaved. We haul water. So 40% of our people haul water. And you would think that, wow, how is this actually happening? But it is. It's like, I think with the pandemic, it really put a perspective, I think, in the U.S. about the need for building infrastructure for tribes. And it's not just where I'm from, it's pretty much all across Indian country. I see the energy unreliability and the dilapidated infrastructure that is deteriorating. I went to so many Alaska villages, and they are in need of basic infrastructure, potable water. A lot of them need broadband. And so just giving you a sense of where Indian country is today, as we are thinking about this clean energy build out and economy, you have to think that tribes are, they are negative. They don't have staff resources. They don't have an energy manager like state offices do. And so these are the realities that me and my team, we know about, and we want to make sure the general public knows about it, leaders know about it, this administration knows about it, because we have, as a federal government, a trust responsibility to our commitment to tribes. Tribes gave up something. They gave up their land, they gave up, and many times they were forced to leave their land for the build out of this country. And I think when it comes to energy justice, these are the things that we all have to do our homework. Where we live right now, even being here in Boston, learning about the Native history, the Massachusetts tribe, what's the history here? How do we correct the wrongs? And I think that's been a really great perspective for me, is like understanding the treaties. And it's really neat to go and read treaties. If you go to visit a tribe, you have to really understand that perspective, because they will ask you, have you read our treaty? So this is, I think, just the overall information I'm sharing with you of Indian country. And I have been working to build this office so that we can build capacity and support tribes to have, energy managers, tribal energy manager, to have, to support the intertribal organizations that work directly with tribes throughout this country, and then also provide financial assistance for clean energy deployment projects. We've been doing this for 10 years. It's not a new thing. Tribes have been leading the way. They have been leaders in the clean energy movement for a very long time. It didn't just happen just recently. And so many examples of the funding that we've provided for these communities and the work that they have put in to be able to sustain their communities out of need. They needed to build resilient energy infrastructure to withstand forest fires, to withstand flooding. And also some are preparing to relocate because of climate impacts. And I think that, when we think about energy justice, we also need to think about how do we at scale, in partnerships with tribes, really unpack, the history, but also I think the relationship building is super key. Tribes have a lot to add with their perspective and they call it indigenous knowledge, their traditional ecological knowledge of design of buildings, of design of community, of planning, of areas that they definitely see value to protect for their future generations. And so I definitely have learned so much in this role, and I think that our office continues to do what we can. And the nice thing about coming into this role is that we've been able, through this administration, bump up our annual appropriations. It used to be ranging between 8 to 20 million annually for 10 years. And now we're up to 75 million. And we hope to keep going, because when I came in, I asked for 500 million. But that's a low ball. I mean, you think of 574 federally recognized tribes. I mean, that's going to require a lot of investment. And I think there is a strategy. on, how do we do this in a way, and as Kathleen Hogan spoke earlier today about the amazing investment and historic investment that is before us, want to encourage you all as you are doing your work. That's really important. And on top of that, being women, I think, is so, I just came from a conference where it was majority men, energy conference and financing conference, and I think that women provide a perspective that is, it is nurturing, it is collective, it is thinking as ecosystems, and I know that that's something we really need, and it needs to be a part of the design and build out of our infrastructure for our communities, our nation, our world, our planet. So I don't know how long I've been talking, but I'm going to pass it back to you. I think I went over my time.
No, you have 14 seconds left. Julia, that's fantastic. All right, Rhonda, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. I hope you are able to hear me.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. As you know, I work for the World Bank, and so I focus my effort and attention on developing countries and helping developing countries build out their energy and power systems to meet their different goals and objectives. So this is a bit of the perspective that I'm gonna give momentarily. So let me just dive right in. So lack of energy access severely hampers the world's ability to reduce poverty, promote economic growth and inclusion, and strengthen resilience. So worldwide, we know that about 675 million people lack access to electricity globally, but about 590 million of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, where I work. More than 1/3 of all food production in sub-Saharan Africa is lost to spoilage on the way to the market, in large part due to lack of refrigeration. Fewer than half of all hospitals in the region have reliable electricity access, and nearly 1/3 of all healthcare facilities have no electricity access either, of any kind. Most schools have no electricity access as well. Moreover, more than 80% of people lack access to clean cooking technologies and fuels. Their traditional cooking fuels expose them to severe health risks, which disproportionately affect women and children and contribute to land and forest degradation and climate change, costing the region upwards of $200 billion annually. So ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all really is an enabler for so many other outcomes, helping to reduce emissions, leading to improved health and education outcomes, can deliver more jobs, catalyze economic development and growth, and more. And obviously, energy access has become a transversal global priority. So accelerating energy access is essential to help deliver on these development goals and address global challenges, including climate change, resilience, and fragility. So despite major efforts recently to expand electricity access in developing countries and in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, the pace of electrification actually needs to triple for the region to achieve universal access by 2030. It's going to require upwards of 25 billion each year to achieve universal access. And unless the pace is accelerated and due to population growth, there will still be about 540 million people without electricity access in Africa by 2030, just marginally fewer than there are today. Furthermore, energy access is highly uneven across the region, increasingly concentrated in rural areas, fragile countries, as well as low-income and vulnerable areas. So for this reason, many organizations such as the World Bank, are putting lots of effort into, increasing this pace of energy access. The bank is putting about $5 billion towards accelerating energy access solely in East and Southern Africa alone, and it will do the same in West Africa as well. So some of the key building blocks that we're considering as we design this program, $5 billion program, are as follows. So first, energy access must be conceived as a means of economic transformation, as well as social equity and inclusive growth. So access is not just about these connections, connecting households to power, but also supporting economic activities, agriculture, productivity, jobs, provision of essential services such as healthcare and education. And so we are working with countries and governments to develop national electrification strategies that contain this expanded and long-term vision of energy access and sustainable energy access. Second, access expansion should be guided through, most of us are engineers, through, least cost planning, geospatial planning, integrating grid and off-grid technologies, covering demand of all population segments. The third is that, it's important to embrace innovations and technologies and business models and adapt them to, for my purposes, developing country context, right? So over the past decade, renewable energy and battery storage innovations have expanded and improved on and off-grid access to electricity for hundreds of millions of households. And so innovations in clean energy will continue to be a key driving force in energy access expansion. And so on this, there are two points I wanted to mention: that just the modularity and consumer orientation of distributed renewable energy companies in the region. They've created this attractive alternative for households and businesses that are typically too far from the grid, those for whom grid is not affordable at all, and for those that suffer from grid reliability issues. So distributed renewable energy companies are serving about 100 million people in sub-Saharan Africa today. On the flip side, centralized grid integrated renewables really are now, and in some cases, proving to be the cheaper option. When I say in some cases, obviously each country is a little bit different. In some landlocked countries who are heavily dependent on HFO and diesel for power generation, this is applicable. So I'm leading a project in West Africa that's deploying about 200 megawatts of grid integrated renewables and including battery storage to help reduce electricity supply costs in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Togo, and Chad. And, again, this is why power planning is so important, because we are trying to maximize the penetration of clean energy to reduce costs in these particular countries, making power consumption more affordable for more of the population in areas ridden with energy poverty. So this, and of course, this project would help reduce emissions tremendously in these countries. And then finally, one of the final building blocks, which is really why we're here to discuss today, is that, it's important to make sure that electrification approaches, whether it's grid or off-grid, are inclusive of all socioeconomic groups and address the issue of affordability, gender equality, as well as special needs and challenges of vulnerable groups. So putting these building blocks in place requires improved coordination and support across all parties, whether it's government agencies, development partners, private sector, and civil society, and ensuring that beneficiaries, as well as those impacted by those interventions, have a say when the energy systems are being designed and deployed, and that they're able to make known the implications of the systems and to whom these implications are affecting. So this is really what we think of as energy justice at the bank. And in the context of large-scale energy access efforts like those that are being funded by the World Bank, energy justice may look like public and stakeholder engagement, plus consultations on the least cost plans and project design before finalization, right? So that they are a part of the decision-making process and a part of the final designs that are agreed upon. The second thing is education programs on how new energy access can be used to benefit the communities, and having resources dedicated to support businesses, whether they're startup businesses or businesses that need to grow. The third thing, this energy justice would look like compensation as well as livelihood restoration programs for those who may be displaced due to this new infrastructure, and also requiring that new jobs for community members accommodate the new infrastructure. And lastly, systematically using what I call the Kaumba yardstick, which is, are you leaving communities better than you found them with the energy access interventions? This requires an honest and holistic assessment of the trade-offs, i.e. the gains as well as the losses incurred by households, businesses, and communities at different project sites. So I will stop there and look forward to our continued discussion.
The panelists are absolutely fantastic with their timing. Right on time. All right, Kathy, we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Janelle. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, great. So it's good to be joining you with such an amazing group of fellow panelists. I'd also like to add my congratulations to Gina McCarthy and the other awardees, as well as thank our organizers. I first attended C3E meetings at MIT with Rhonda from our panel here about a decade ago as a doctoral student, and I'm happy to support the continuing progress of the organization in its second decade. Now, to provide you some background for my remarks, I study and am a book author of energy transitions in addition to my work with the CAES Energy Policy Institute and as professor of sustainable energy. And across these roles, I evaluate energy transitions for policy and related decision making. Now, in doing so, I look at community choice and critical infrastructure, as well as how readiness and consent may factor. Specific examples that I've considered include countries such as Brazil for its biofuels and Iceland for geothermal energy adoption. Similarly, at the local and regional levels within the United States, I've evaluated potential with decarbonizing change for coal mining counties in the southwestern area of Pennsylvania, the coal and oil exporting area of Gillette, Wyoming, and the remote diesel fuel importing region around Nome, Alaska. From this line of work, I offer a few thoughts. As with any societal change, energy-based or otherwise, we know there are natural tensions among those who gain and those who lose. Resistance, such as that for new technology or practices, may be more about the unknown than about the actual option and careful weighting of its trade-offs. Now, how society handles those trade-offs of equity and affordability can define us. Some may look to possibilities, for example, where there are the greatest gains and least losses. Naturally, this alone could take a distinctly different form over time based on new information, conditions, people, and interests. Now, historically, we probably can acknowledge that technocratic approaches have often been employed for energy decision-making, with engineering and least cost economics primarily determining the investment choices. And in this context, citizens were often seen generally as passive consumers in transactional terms. Yet today, energy decision-making is changing in response to the environment, geopolitics, public health, economics, and other considerations. Energy justice and equity priorities like affordability unfortunately don't have a consensus of meaning, so it is often the local planners and analysts who set the early tone and scope, whether they realize it or not. In practice, this may translate to what is readily accessible or modeled based on quantifiable information, with less measurable values and perspectives in turn being missed. But there is important learning, though, that it is occurring in recent decades. Some of this is occurring in terms of the inclusion of key stakeholders, rights holders, and knowledge holders at the table. Importantly, it's critical to understand how these groups differ and align. Moreover, what is the criteria for inclusion? Who decides? And how are the advantages and disadvantages of the past factor for a specific community? In addition, Learning, participatory processes, and trust building take time. It's fair to say that public meetings may satisfy legal requirements without really addressing equity or past harms. This highlights a core challenge for those in public service and planning to be savvy stewards in order that there is real two-way engagement and not simply one-way reporting of foregone conclusions. Going another step, the ways in which our organizations and processes function can reflect natural biases that in turn can produce skewed outcomes. Specific to bias, I've seen how something as simple as funding research and energy reporting can shape or limit options. Reporting, for example, has often traditionally combined all renewables into one number while separating the various fossil fuels and nuclear energy. This creates areas that are more readily studied or pursued with inherent barriers for other forms of energy. Looking at groups such as tribes, my team sees a wealth of critical and pertinent knowledge for energy and natural resource management that tribes often hold. Importantly, we're also seeing tribes pooling resources and expertise as well as land now to develop multi-tribal utilities and grid projects. These are forms of empowerment that may offer us pretty considerable lessons as we continue down this path. More broadly, I'll underscore that inclusive engagement, knowledge sharing, and other forms of collaboration can strengthen the legitimacy and more enduring aspects of outcomes. So planners should recognize that logistical measures such as simple outreach for meetings can create lock-in around incumbents and exclude other actors. Here, once more, planners as well as analysts and decision makers play a pivotal role and should scrutinize for gaps in key perspectives, assumptions, and scope. Looking even more widely, cross-sectoral collaboration with inclusion and learning as guiding principles can provide pivotal traction for meeting longer-term aims amidst a transition. Finally, there are many different ideas about the role for government in shaping the energy playing field. Given the fundamental aspects of energy for life, the widely entrenched nature of the energy system, and the intersecting challenges with other priorities, government has a vital role to play. Here, public actors and policy can be instrumental in bridging gaps at critical junctures in a way that no other group can. So to finish, there's an old expression attributed to Elliot Montrol that evolution is a sequence of replacements. We have a real opportunity to advance our energy system and choices with much more meaningful inclusion. So let's seize that opportunity. Thank you.
Fantastic set of comments. Wahleah, really appreciate what you brought in acknowledging the significance of the knowledge systems, the community, the culture that tribes offer and can bring to planning and decision making around an energy transition, and then just the historical stewardship role that they've played. But then also the kind of the hurt and the exclusion that has historically happened, especially in the last century, around the grid build out and not connecting, intentionally not connecting tribal communities in many places to those resources. Rhonda, I think you very nicely built this out thinking about what the World Bank tries to do in delivering a very top-centric vision that's operating at a very large scale down and drilling it into a local community. And so there, the kind of critical issue of how do you meet the communities where they are, how do you deliver the full service of needs that they might have, and how do you be accessible and inclusive in that process? Because I think you made a really fantastic point that energy security services all kinds of other forms of resilience, that you can't really meet food resilience or housing security without energy security. And then Kathy, really appreciate the way you carried this on, talking about how we need to meet resistance to energy transition with better education, awareness building, and inclusion of all of the different knowledge stakeholders into the decision-making process. And then also just, the challenge of building trust and being responsible public stewards, how that is both challenging for developers as well as for government. So this takes me to the first question that I want to pose for all of the panelists, which is, as you envision your dreams for what energy justice is or could be, what role do you see for public universities like MIT in building out and working in collaborative partnership with governments, with developers, with corporations and others to achieve that kind of energy justice. I don't know if anyone wants to, maybe we'll start with you, Wahleah, and take the same flow for the other panelists.
Sure. I think there's great models of partnerships between tribes, tribal communities in different states that, partnered with universities on trying to support with studies or with analyzing. I think there was an engineering team, several engineering teams that have supported through different universities grant writing assistance or grant applications for tribes, or working in partnership with tribes. And it's nice. It's nice to have that perspective of students contributing to not just studying something that is not actually seeing it like a project. They're actually working on a project, and it comes to fruition. And I think that's really valuable. Is kind of matching different skill sets of students and faculty to support and be in partnership with community and tribes. So it's amazing. I always love those type of projects. I think there's amazing organizing happening on campuses around building out sort of, especially with tribal colleges and universities. I think there's currently 37, and if there could be more collaboration across the country in supporting TCUs and creating a workforce pipeline, or even programs that can help support students to learn more about clean energy, learn more about design and application of clean energy technology to sustain their communities. And I think campuses are great models for showing and demonstrating how our sort of like testing grounds of how we can be applying clean energy in our communities. And it takes you make mistakes too, and I think that's also part of the learning process. And but I do see a huge role for universities and TCUs, especially as we have a funding opportunity that was open for the first time, $15 million to help transition TCUs to 100% clean energy, and offered $500K for a planning grant. And so that was the first time we opened that up this year. So we'll see how all the applications come out. But I do think it's, again, they're going to need a lot of support. So however that partnership can happen between states and universities with TCUs, I think that, and how campuses are already going net zero, there could be some peer-to-peer learning there.
Excellent. Thank you, Wahleah. It's a great suggestion. Rhonda?
Thank you. So I think on this, I'll defer almost to what my comfort zone is, and actually piggyback off of what Kathy was mentioning earlier when she was talking about really ensuring inclusion in the planning process, and how the role of planners is important, as they will need to become public stewards to really be able to ensure energy justice. And so I think from my perspective, the role of a public university could be to help define more systematic approaches to incorporate the softer features into planning, power planning, access planning, electrification planning, looking at issues of affordability, looking at issues on social equity, really trying to understand in certain communities what are, if it's a remote village, what are the crops that might be grown in that remote village. And, where, let's say, solar is going to be built in a particular community. What productivity is it potentially displacing? And then thinking about, what are alternative sources of income, what are alternative means of still producing, the same output of products that might be required by that particular community. I mean, lots of thinking around how planning can be, I guess, strengthened to incorporate these types of features that aren't typically included in your traditional, power planning approaches. So I would say there's certainly a role for universities to, bring both your engineering, your physics, electrical engineering aspects, as well as these other issues of social justice into the planning process. That's my answer.
Wonderful. Kathy?
So I think the answers so far have been very good, and I will simply kind of round them out. I do believe that public universities and other universities, as well as community colleges, can be playing a role, be done doing objective and evidence-based research in terms of convening meetings, identifying core questions in partnership with tribes, communities, and industry, as well as in terms of training the next generation of decision makers. And so I participate in a variety of consortia that reflect these elements, and I'll mention two. One is the Center for Advanced Energy Studies, which is based in the Intermountain West with public universities plus Idaho National Lab. Another is the Emerging Energy Markets Analysis Initiative out of Idaho National Lab, and both are truly emblematic of the sum of the parts represents more value that collectively than we would if we remained doing our work separately. And there are certainly other kinds of alliances and coalitions around the country. So this is a great question, and I think it offers a lot of good material for us to consider as the next day of meetings highlights other areas that we can build out.
Terrific. All right, I want to open it up to the audience and see if we have some questions for our panel from all of you. Anyone want to start? Yes, over here. Do we have a mic floating? And if you could just briefly introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm Susan Petty with Alta Rock Energy. A number of geothermal projects have been started on various tribal lands, and one of the issues is that the government funding only covers usually 80% of these projects, which for most indigenous groups, that's impossible to come up with that other 20%. So that's one issue. And I don't know if there's any future policy changes that would help that. The other issue is that tribal councils change, and then the new people don't know about the geothermal project, or they don't understand what it would be about, and they end up canceling it. So it's one of those things where these geothermal projects take a long time, but they can be very good for the community and very helpful. So I'd like to hear what kind of policies are possibly in place in the future that might help with this situation.
Great, excellent question. Wahleah, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So our office had a 50% cost share requirement, and since I've been in this role, I've lowered it down to, we can go as low as 10%. And this has been a huge, we've seen I think 60% increase of new applications. So we wanted to identify sort of challenges and barriers that tribes face in general when it comes to federal funding opportunities, and one is the cost share. There are a number of through the bipartisan infrastructure law provisions that are that don't require cost share, and we hope that that could be something that could be applicable to, especially the demographic of where, when tribes come from certain communities, sense attractive, being in poverty, having low-income communities, so that they can participate. And we understand that it is challenging. The other pieces, we have a whole analysis around the struggle when it comes to tribes participating. And I think you'll hopefully see some changes in some of the provisions, but can't speak to specific projects in regards to geothermal. We just know that this administration is really trying to make some changes within our, within our statutes, but also within our agency. Sometimes when you have our agency trying to implement the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, already comes with certain requirements that we can't change. That's something that Congress detailed out in the provisions. So those are challenges that we face all the time as an agency, knowing that our charge is to make sure that everyone can participate, that has access to these funding opportunities. Good question.
Rhonda or Kathy, did you want to comment on that question as well?
Nothing from my side to add there.
Yeah, I think Wahleah did a nice job. I'll leave it there.
All right. Other questions from the audience? Maybe while everyone's still thinking, there's one actually in the back. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Solène. I work at the MIT Energy Initiative. I guess I have a question about mobility and training. As you know, we're going to transition from a fossil fuel energy system to a more, hopefully, low-carbon energy system. Some jobs are going to be turned into other new jobs, and people will have to be retrained or trained. Perhaps these jobs are going to be located in other places because it isn't obvious that a solar farm, for instance, should be located where a previous power plant using coal used to be. And so my question to you is it something that you had to think about or discuss? Is it something that some perhaps communities have been fearing, the fact that they might have to move, or is it, it might be a bit too broad.
Yeah, so the general question is, from our experts on the panel, what are they experiencing with communities facing energy transition? And that could be either the removal of infrastructure or even industries that they're working for, and how are the communities responding to that? Is that correct? Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure our panelists have different experiences from their different range of work. Wahleah, do you want to start again with that?
Sure. Yeah, it's tough. We lost about 1,500 Native American workers that used to work at the coal mine and coal plant. Many of them have to move to different locations outside their home. Their tribe was on tribal land, so they had to move maybe down to Phoenix or California for other jobs, and that's definitely something that I feel like maybe we could have planned better around this energy transition. And coming from a coal-impacted community, that's something that we really pushed for in 2005 was a just transition proposal, and making sure that companies don't walk away, that they actually leave something for the community, an investment, so that they can transition. And I think from the last couple administrations, they did see, due to the different requirements for coal plant facilities to put on scrubbers and, different to reduce their pollutants, we learned a lot about all the kind of infrastructure, energy, coal plant infrastructure, and the need to support energy. We call them energy communities, communities that have been hosting coal plants or coal mines in their backyard. And so this administration, I think the first week of Biden's administration, is he came out with a memo to really focus on identifying, I think they identified, I can't remember the number now, it keeps going up, but billions of dollars for energy communities in the federal agencies. We did a whole data call on what's available that can support economic revitalization of these communities so that they're not left behind. What are some incentives that we can give the workers that are in this transition? We have the tax rebates for energy communities, 10%. And then we also have, there's a number of provisions focused on, for one is, it was a funding award for $500 million or $550 million for repurposing brownfield lands or coal mine lands to utilize or host solar or clean energy projects. So there's a lot of provisions like that in thinking about these communities in their transition. And specifically, we're working with Navajo Nation right now. We have an MOU, interagency MOU, to help them in their economic revitalization planning process. And it's been really powerful. And we're also hoping to do the same thing with the Hopi tribe and then other nations that come to us that are seeing the benefits for us to be more as a facilitator and engage and connect them to these funding opportunities. There's a lot just outside of Department of Energy. There's many with Commerce and USDA. So there's just so much out there. But energy transition is, I think, a big part of my work, and I love it, and I love the really thinking with community 50 to 100 years from now. How do we see how do we see our communities? What are the things that we still don't have here that we would like to see? So it really puts community, kind of takes them out of right now and looking forward. So that's a really fun process to do with communities. Yeah.
Excellent. Rhonda, do you want to comment?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I would just say that, we certainly, in our energy access projects, one, tremendously important part of beginning any project is ensuring that if households or communities are going to be impacted through, the deployment of new infrastructure. As I mentioned before, that of course there's compensation, but there are, livelihood restoration programs. So first and foremost, typically when we're designing the projects, we are looking for areas where really there are very, very, very few people that might be on those lands. If it's, let's say it's a solar PV project and, anywhere in any country, we're really identifying land that is largely clear, where we're not having to displace anyone. But if through the project that the government is having to displace people, as I mentioned, there's this compensation that happens, and literally the project implementation units, along with, bank staff, we will walk by foot along project sites, identify whether it's households or businesses that are operating, really understand what is the business for, how much they're earning, what were their long-term plans for the business, and what are options for them to develop their business elsewhere, and actually really leave them in a better position than they are even, at the time that we're interviewing them. And so as part of bank projects, we require that governments set aside that budget for not just the compensation, but the livelihood restoration as well. And sometimes that's looking at, maybe developing new business plans with some of the community members, et cetera, that own small businesses and whatnot. So it's really, it's a key part of our engagement when we roll out any projects. It's something that can't be skipped, and projects can be suspended if they don't actually undertake those activities and planning with the communities. So I'll stop there.
All right, Kathy?
Sure. So as industry changes occur with new winners and losers featuring largely in the community strategies, I've had this conversation with many of the communities that I work with. And what I would encourage them to consider is where their natural strengths are and repurposing not only of skills, but of the infrastructure itself. So just to call out a couple of energy examples that some in the audience may be involved with or know about. So with oil and gas expertise, there's a lot of new work happening which is applying the skill sets to geothermal development. Similarly with offshore exploration, that's being translated with offshore wind development. And then hydrogen is also largely being undertaken by a lot of the traditional fossil plants. Carbon capture and storage and the broader other additional forms of carbon management are also being brought into play here. I in the United States, this is not only happening with coal plants, but recently was and has continued to happen with a number of nuclear facilities too, for a different set of reasons, but the impacts on the local community feel the same. So this is what some call the concept of a just transition, in that we're thinking more carefully about how these economic impacts matter for a given community rapidly, much more systematically.
Kathy, I think we might have lost you there at the end. We'll give it a second. We're also, okay, well hopefully Kathy logs back in with us. We're almost out of time. I appreciate so much what all of the panelists have brought to this discussion, and I want to close with a final question. I have the privilege of teaching with Jean-Luc Pierite in the front row, an Indigenous Energy and Water Planning class that's been very graciously sponsored by Mighty this term, and we're tackling energy and water planning from the standpoint of Indigenous futurism, which is really exciting, I think a kind of creative way to explore the topic, and then we're going to push the students to speculate and think about how they would work with communities to transform planning. So in the spirit of something you said, Wahleah, about thinking with the community 50 to 100 years from now, I want to ask each of the panelists if they could just very briefly in 30 seconds, thinking about the communities that you work with and that you serve, what does energy justice and a just transition look like for you and for them in 50 to 100 years? So Wahleah, we'll start with you again.
Oh, wow. I mean, I think I feel like it's a time where my children, their children, and their children can enjoy the beauty that we all inherited from many people before me, and the connection that we continue to have as Indigenous people is really beautiful, and I would love to see all of us speaking our language again and thriving in that way, and doing great healing, because I feel like that's what is really needed continuously. And I don't know, I just have a lot of faith and hope in that, and our wisdom will help save our planet. And it's something that every Indigenous person I meet globally is that we carry that special gift of very solution-oriented, very positive, not just thinking about ourselves. It's about, we all the time, and then the central parts are about nature, about water, about this land, about this air, and all living things. And I think that's the unique perspective that tribes or indigenous people have that has been maybe not understood historically, and maybe it comes, it disagrees with economy, it disagrees with development sometimes, and we got to figure out a strategy to live in a way that we are caretaking of our Mother Earth. So that's what I see. I am really hopeful of the future. I know in this climate crisis we're in, but I have to be.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Wahleah. It's important to be hopeful. That's really lovely. Rhonda?
Thank you so much. I mean, if I only have 30 seconds, so I would say in 100 years, I would like to see in the communities in which we work that the households have access to power and essential services, including health and education. There are new businesses that are not harming the environment, and there's clean energy supporting jobs that have helped the communities rise above the poverty line. That's what I would like to see in 100 years. I think that would be energy justice in some of the communities in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhonda. And finally, Kathy?
Sure. So I would like to see decision-making processes that are representative and unbiased, as well as benefits and costs of energy provision that are fairly distributed. And going just a step further, I would say, building on what the others on this really incredible panel have said, wouldn't it be fantastic if we were doing such a much better job of harnessing some of the resources that we have in a way that is not exacerbating the wealth gap, and instead is making it much more energy much more readily available in a clean manner for everyone. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, you three are so inspiring, and really appreciate what you've said on this panel and all of the incredible work that you're doing. So please keep going. Thank you so much to the audience as well. And I think